Thank you for choosing to watch this video. Please subscribe to my channel. If you enjoy the video, drop it a like. Any comments and feedback are always welcome. This is my tying of a Half Hog Hopper aimed at representing a heatherfly. Start by mounting your hook in the vise. Here I'm using Fulling Mills Czech Nymph heavyweight barbless hook. It's a good strong hook. When setting in the vise, you want to angle it so that the eye and the shank adjacent to it are horizontal. This will help when tying in the wings. Catch on your thread. Here I'm using Semperfli's Nano Silk 12 knot in black. Once you've got the thread on a bit, trim away the waste and start forming a bit of an underbody. I'll catch in the rib material before I completely finish the underbody. This helps build a little bit of a taper in and avoids building up too much bulk at the tail of the fly. For the rib, I'm using Fulling Mills Flex Floss in black. I'll catch it in on the underside of the hook. I've got quite a short length, so it's a little bit tricky to catch the tag in, but position it where you need it to be on the underside of the hook and stretch it quite tight as you're tying it in. You can't stretch it too much at first or you'll pull it out, but once you've got it tied in a bit you can really stretch it quite a bit. Try and make sure you keep it on the underside of the hook as you tie it down. I want to tie it in a good distance around the bend of the hook. This will give us a nice profile of the sunk abdomen when fishing the fly. That should do for the end of the body. Now bring the thread back up, tidying up any bits on the underbody where you've missed. And then I'll try and trim away the waist end. With the Flex Floss it's quite good if you can trim it away under tension, but I think I've left too short a tag to do that easily. So I'll just trim away the waist and then I'll tidy up the tie-in point with some wraps of tying thread. It's not too much of a tag there, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue later in the fly. Once you're happy, take your thread back down to the end of the body and we can start dubbing the body. For dubbing the body and wrapping it onto the hook, I like to position the hook in the horizontal position. This keeps the point out of the way and gives me some more clear space to work with. For the body of this fly I'm using some of Fulling Mills Nymph Thorax dub. This dubbing is a blend of 2 natural fibres and some synthetic material. It gives a nice spiky body with a subtle translucence. It dubs quite nicely onto the thread. As always, with dubbing less is more, so take your time and add about half of what you think you need. I want to try and form a nice taper to this as well, so I want to start the body reasonably thin. Having said that, the heatherfly has a reasonably chunky body, so you don't want to go too fine at the start. Take your time, make sure you're happy with the dubbing noodle, and when you get the first wrap caught on you can tighten it up a bit more. Then form your body and make sure you've got a smooth transitioner as you work your way up, adding more dubbing as you go or as you need. It's always easier to add a bit more dubbing than it is to take it away. On a recent fishing trip up north I saw quite a few heatherfly on the wing, which gave me the inspiration to get to the vise and tie a few up. The Half Hog Hopper style of fly is very versatile and can be tied in different colour schemes to match a lot of different insects, and it's a very effective pattern. Well worth having a selection in your box. You want to take the body up about 2/3 of the hook or thereabouts, depending on how heavy you want the wing and thorax to be. And we're not too far off at this point. So as you can see, the body's quite rough and spiky. It's a nice bucky effect on it. Once you're happy with where the body's tied up to, the next step is to rib with the flexi-floss. We'll put one turn at the bottom of the body and then rib in open turns, allowing the buggy dubbing to show through. The flex floss isn't really there to strengthen the fly at this point, it's more to add a little translucence and segmentation. Once you've ribbed the fly, catch in with tying thread, try and keep the thread under tension as you catch on a few wraps to stop the rib slipping. Throw in a locking turn and trim away the waist under tension. This will give you a neat tie-in point for the flex floss. Take a little bit of time to tidy up the tie-in point, positioning your thread at the end of the body, ready to tie in the legs. For the legs in this fly, we're using some of Vineyard's Knotted Pheasant Tails legs dyed red. This suits the heather fly pattern quite well, with the thighs of their legs are red. Not going to get too worried about the number of legs that they actually have, but I typically tie these with 3 legs in on either side. While fishing these flies, some of the legs are almost guaranteed to get damaged, so it's always good to have a few spare. Catch the first 3 in on one side and then follow up with the 3 from the other side of the feather on the other side. Tying them in to be the same length and also just a bit longer than the hook shank, so they stick out behind the fly. Make sure you're happy that the lengths are equal, then catch in securely. I try to tie these in so they're on either side of the hook. Tidy up the tie-in point, and then we're ready to dub the first part of the thorax. Again, to keep in with the red and black coloration of the naturals, I'm using some of Fooling Mill's Silex dub in fluorescent red. You only need a very small amount of dubbing here to cover up the tie-in point for the legs before we tie in the first wing. That should be plenty, then just fold back any stray fibres to make sure we're not tying those down. Then now it's time to tie in the first wing. So for the wings I'm using a roe deer dyed black. So the amount of deer here you want to tie in will depend on how heavy you want the wing and what sort of conditions you're aiming for. It's worth tying some lighter and heavier pattern dressings so that they can suit a bigger wave or rougher conditions. For this fly I'm aiming for somewhere in the medium area, so it's not a huge bunch of hair. As you can see, I'm using a knit comb to strip out the underfur. It's always good practice as the underfur will be slightly more absorbent, and that's not what we want in the wings. They're there to produce or provide the buoyancy. It might not be so critical as we're not spinning the hair. So once we've got the underfur stripped out, we stack the hair in a hair stacker to even up all the tips. And measure up against the fly. I want something just about the length of the body. Again, this is something you can experiment with and play with. So once I've measured it up, I trim off the waist ends so I tie in the tag ends. So I loosely loop 2 wraps round and then pull tight, and then bind down the cut ends. I like to trim the deer hair before I tie in the wing because it helps me keep the tie-in point neater. Because using the nano silk here, because it's such a strong thread, you have to be slightly careful you don't cut through the deer hair with the tying thread. That should do nicely for catching it in. Then we apply a bit more of the thorax dubbing over the cut ends. You want to take your time here because you've got to keep enough space to get a second wing tied in. See, try and keep your dubbing over the tied in deer hair to give us plenty space to get the second wing in. This is where the tying can get a little bit tricky, especially if you've not left yourself too much room. The first few ties of this one, it might be worth leaving a bit more space. So preparing the second wing of deer hair, again removing the underfur, and then using the hair stacker to align the tips. We want to use roughly the same amount of deer hair for the second wing as the first, maybe slightly more. You can use the first wing as a guide for the length. Again, trim to length before tying in. So try and hold everything else back out of the way. Again, the 2 loose wraps and then pinch down. Now, I think I've got too long a set of waist ends there, and it's going to make the eye messy. So rather than try and save that bunch of deer hair, I'll take it off, and I think I'll actually prepare a new wing that's a bit neater and maybe slightly lighter. It's a good point. There's very few places within a tying of a fly that you can't go backwards and correct a mistake. It's very difficult to sort something like that out and make a fly you'll be happy with at the end. So I've got a slightly lighter bunch of deer hair. That's it out of the stacker. Measuring up again for length. Trim the waist ends to length. And when you're tying these in, you want to pinch it and hold it quite tightly on the top of the hook so it doesn't flare around too much. And then your loose straps, once I've adjusted the bobbin to the right length, and it's natural, make sure the thread's sitting in the right place so it doesn't slip too close to the eye. And catch on with the 2 loose straps and tighten up. And I'm happy with the way those are lying, so we should make that work. So just bind down the loose ends, making sure we try and trap them all under the tying thread. If you leave them sticking out, they'll poke out through the the last bit of thorax dubbing will apply to finish off the fly. You do want to be careful not to crowd the eye too much, because we do still have to add one more bit of dubbing. Adding a bit more dubbing will help the wings sit back further and position it nicely. Again, you need to be quite light with the dubbing on this. And you want the dubbing noodle to be quite tight so you've not got too many stray fibres. And leave yourself enough space to form a neat head. See, take your time, make sure you're happy with the way the dubbing's sitting. And don't be afraid to reapply it if you're not quite happy. So my fingers in the way, I'm just pulling all the dubbing and materials back as much as I can as I form the head. So once I'm happy with how the head's looking, I'll whip finish. 3-turn whip finish is plenty strong enough. Trim off your thread, and that's the tying just about finished. I'll brush out the thorax and wing with this cut down toothbrush. I want to be quite gentle because I don't want to damage the pheasant tail legs as they are quite fragile, but just try and pick out the thorax into the wing a bit and make sure the wing's sitting nicely, and try and pull out some of the body dubbing through the rib to get a nice buggy effect. Pull off any of the longer strands of dubbing that I'm not happy with, and then I'll finish the fly off with some, you could use varnish or, as I'm using here, some Solara's bone dry clear UV resin. It's really thin and sets hard under the UV lamp, so your fly's ready to go immediately. Sorry, my fingers in the way. I'm pulling back all the dubbing to try and avoid getting any of the resin onto the thorax. Using my fingers against the vise to stabilise the brush as I'm applying the resin. Then set the resin with a UV lamp, but check that the eye's clear first. And you can see under the UV lamp how that fluorescent red Silex dubbing really does pop quite nicely, and you can really see it coming through the wing there. And that's the fly finished. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, any comments and feedback are always welcome. If there are any patterns you'd like to see me tie, don't hesitate to let me know.